So Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'd just like to thank you for enlightening me about Milton Friedman and his phoning Nobel Prize back in the day.
Sure.
Because I've been reading more about him and the Chicago boy fascists and stuff.
Yeah.
So, one time you mentioned in the past about a policy Reagan set up in motion that has resulted in CEO pay being 30 times more than the average worker. What was that specifically?
Prior to the 1980s, if you were a CEO, you couldn't, your company could not deduct the cost of giving you stock options as part of your compensation. And if you took those stock options as part of your compensation, then you couldn't, and you had gains on them, you couldn't charge those as capital gains. So just pay a low income tax rate. You know, it was 20% during the Reagan administration. Well, it's 20% right now. Instead, you had to pay the regular, the full income tax rate, which at that time was 74%, the top rate. And so what changed during the Reagan administration, and I write about this in my book, Rebooting the American Dream, was they changed the tax code rules about how senior executives could be compensated so that they could be compensated with stock. And in fact, this was a very intentional thing. There was a movement to push this. It was pushed by the Carl Icahns of the world, these predatory capitalists. And the argument that they made was that if the CEOs, that the company was really owned by its stockholders, and therefore the CEOs and the senior executives should always be making their decision in terms of what's best for the stockholders. And the way to cause them to think like that is to make them huge stockholders, is to make a large part of their compensation whether the stock goes up or down. And so they changed these policies, and now you've got these CEOs who, they may still only take $1 million or $2 million a year or $500,000 a year in, quote, salary, where that they pay, up to 39% income tax on. But then they'll take an additional 5, 10, 15, 50, 100, $200 million in stock options that when they exercise them, they pay a maximum 20% income tax on. And they're making decisions based on what's going to jack up the price of the stock. So for example, they're borrowing money at cheap rates right now to buy back shares, which simply increases the value of stock. It does absolutely nothing for the world. And this kind of financialization of business now in the United States as a consequence of this has not only led us to a situation where CEOs are making, up until the 80s, CEOs almost never made more than 30 times what their employees made. And the really wealthy ones got that way by basically owning large amounts of stock in their company, but they started the company, the Ford family, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the DuPonts, whatnot. But after that change, we had not only these CEOs and senior executives like at United Healthcare. You got 100 people making over $1 million a year. You got a CEO who's taken over $1 billion, most of it in stock options, and you wonder why they don't want to pay your hospital bill. So that has happened, but the other problem with that is that it's based on flawed thinking. A CEO doesn't just have a responsibility to stockholders. Prior to the Reagan era, the average CEO in the United States had worked at the same company for more than 30 years. They literally started in the stockroom or on the assembly line and worked their way up to the executive office over and over and over again. That was the normal story in 1980 for corporate CEOs in the United States. Now, CEOs just move from company to company all the time. There's no, and because prior to this change, this we're all in it for the stockholders. Prior to that, the CEOs all understood, and everybody, there was a business consensus, a national consensus, that there were multiple people to whom, or parties to whom the CEO was responsible. There was, of course, the stockholders. There were also the employees. The CEO had to make decisions based on what was going to be good or bad for the employees. There were the customers, what's good or bad for the customers. There was the local community, what's good or bad for our community. And then there was the institution of the corporation itself. And all of those things now are collapsing. CEOs no longer give a rat's ass about their employees. They're very happy to just shut a factory down and move it to Mexico. They no longer care about their customers. They're fine just importing junk from overseas and having people have, disposable products rather than fixable products. They don't care about the community in which they're operating. They no longer have any obligation to that. And they have no obligation to the company as an institution. In fact, they're more than willing to break it up, sell it off, do whatever they can that's going to maximize the value of the stock and thus their paycheck. And so out of this nice theory, and by the way, it was one of the kind of Friedman theories, out of this nice theory that CEOs should be reflecting the interests of the stockholders, came this change in tax policy. Part of it was legislatively done, part of it was done administratively within the executive branch, that brought this about. Have I answered your question, Jeff?
Yeah. One last thing. I think this is the same type of thing that's happening with colleges. They have so many administrators, and they're not looking out for what they're supposed to do, is educate the kids.
No, it could be. I think the biggest problem with our colleges, the two biggest problems with our colleges are, number one, you got for-profit colleges and for-profit loan institutions that are badly distorting the marketplace. And number two, when Reagan came into office, more than 80% of the cost of college tuition was paid for by state and federal governments. And now it's only about 20%. So tuition used to pay for 20% of the cost of education in college. Now it pays for about 80% of the cost of going to college. So as we've seen that transition, and Reagan began that too, by putting Bill Bennett in as Secretary of Education, Bill Bennett who had campaigned for president against Reagan back, in the primaries, on a platform of abolishing the Department of Education. Reagan put him in charge of it, and so he did to the whole United States what he did to the University of California system when he was in California, which it used to be free college. So,
yeah, definitely.
It's astonishing the damage that the Reagan administration did to this country, and how little people realize this. So,
yes.
Anyhow, Jeff, thanks. You were going to say?
Well, Benjamin Ginsburg wrote an article called "Administrators Ate My Tuition." I suggest you could pass it on. I'll put it to your page, but it's great about how many. It's massive amount of administrators. Yeah,
in for-profit colleges, you see a lot of that. In not-for-profit colleges, well, I don't know. But certainly that's not probably helping. Jeff, thanks a lot for the call. On the other hand, you do need administration. There are things that have to be done. I'm wary of simple answers to complex problems. It's what Trump is offering. It's not good. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes before.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.